this show is called Rose Parade, and it began in 2012. My wife and I went to Pasadena and took pictures of the Rose Parade in Pasadena. I had been making work about nature. All my work has been about a relationship between art and nature and the natural and the made, like the manufactured, you know. I think I'm interested in that correlation between what artists make and sort of what nature makes. And making art is kind of an emulation of the creative process. And I think I choose botanical things because I'm interested in exploring that specific idea, you know, of, in kind of a Frankenstein way, trying to recreate life, points to the futility of recreating life, talks about the endless variety of line that's in nature, and sort of the artist as creator and the artist as kind of a hack of nature, you know. So, so I had been drawing nature on the computer since 2005. I did a series of tree drawings in which, like, the idea was to draw every leaf of a tree, and there was a nice correspondence between what my hand could do and, you know, making 1,000 loops, like simple outlines, and every leaf is different and every loop is different, so there was a nice, like, one-to-one correspondence. After looking at my work, I noticed that everything was determined by the actual plant or the actual tree, and I wanted to skew these things a little bit more towards the art and less towards the nature. And so I was thinking of examples of that, and the Rose Parade came to mind, just that, you know, decorating things with flowers in patterns seemed like an exciting opportunity, you know, to combine both. So it was a little scary, but I contacted a float company and just wondered if it was possible, if I could go out there and take pictures. And they're actually all decorated over a weekend. I mean, they build them over months, but the weekend of New Year's Day, you know, they have all these volunteers and they get flowers that have been cut, you know, in Brazil and Argentina, like a few days before, and they, you know, all these flowers arrive within hours, really, of when they're cut, and they get put on these floats, and they only live for 48 hours maybe, or something like that. So that, again, I had in mind as kind of a poignancy of, like, the ephemeralness of these things. But then as paint is made to be permanent. Paint is made to not fade. You know, so I thought that was a nice counterpoint. So I worked on these over the last year and a half, 2 years, and then I'll talk about how it ties into the prints. So my process is I work from photographs, and so I took pictures of the floats, and what was great about it was it gave me really specific examples of lots of flowers in patterns. And on the computer, I just make a simple outline around every shape. And to me, I think of it as kind of a way of honoring all these parts. And after sort of inputting all this information, I played for a long time with different patterns, different slices of the pattern, copying and mirroring the pattern, until I arrived at a few motifs. And it's not easily apparent to see initially, but so this painting is made up of one drawing. Each panel is one drawing, like a section of a pattern. And then it's mirrored and repeated. So, you know, this and this are the same drawing, just mirrored. You know, so if you like look at just the bright yellow flowers, you can sort of see how, you know, this is a reflection of that, and this is the same as that. And so really, it's like two diptychs of mirrored, or this painting and this painting are the same, and this painting and that painting is the same. And part of the genesis of this work was I was excited by the idea of creating a parade of paintings, of creating a painting the same thing multiple times. Because in my work, I draw it by hand, but then it becomes mechanized because it's digital and it's in this machine. And so even though I drew it by hand, printing it more than once makes it machine-made. You know, it makes it so exact that I couldn't have done that by hand. And the idea is to return it back to something by hand by painting over the lines again. So So this process of drawing it and sort of honoring these lines by drawing them and printing them and then going over again with paint, and then allowing the paint, because it's of this world, physical material, it changes the drawing back again to something unique. So every time I painted it, it's sort of the same and it's sort of different.
How are they being printed then?
Yeah, well, so my work has been printed in different ways, and because once it was in the computer, that was a problem to solve. Like, how do I want to get it out of the computer? It could exist just in the computer, it could be projected, but from the very beginning, I wanted to return it to some sort of traditional-looking material in a way. So what's exciting is the lines don't exist at any scale or color in the computer. It's a little hard to understand, but so you can zoom in and zoom out, and it's all drawn rather loosely. But when you zoom out, it's very detailed looking, But it's made up of a lot of real simple lines. When they're printed out, like on these white pictures in the hallway, I don't know if you've seen those, or this, I chose to make the lines like pencil, so I made them very thin, and I made them graphite color. And I mean, the actual printer, it's a printer that can print, it's like an inkjet printer, but it can print on any material. So it's called a board printer. So it takes the digital file, and I had it printed on the canvas. Same way with this, under the paint, it's printed on the canvas, but instead of being pencil-like, I actually color-coded each flower so that, like, the yellow flowers might have been brown lines, and the pink flowers might have been orange lines. But I think there's 12 colors in here, and I chose 12 colors of flowers to create the pattern so that I could, pay attention to it. But so the prints are the same way, but these are printed as photographs. So these actually came about after I had completed these paintings. I knew I wanted to find kind of a print counterpart, show some of the technology involved in these in a different form. And so these, and I came up with the idea of a bouquet of cut flowers because it's a part of this work, in that they're cut and they're not natural and they're arranged. And so I ended up buying a bunch of roses, and I gave some to my wife afterward. And I photographed them individually and drew them individually and then made bouquets on the computer in different arrangements. So they're artificial in that way, but they're drawings of specific roses instead of generic roses. And a bouquet of roses is a very kind of hackneyed, cliche, subject. And so I like playing against sort of the genericness of it and the specificness of it, the specificity of looking specifically at these. And these were real roses, and now they're not. Now they live on, in this form. I listen to a lot of music as I create this stuff because you can tell I spend a lot of time alone. And there's this musician that I like a lot. His name's Conor Oberst, and actually the titles of these come from a song of his in which it's called Time Forgot. But so in the song, I think it points to this tension between sort of the everyday world and a transcendental world, and sort of being uncomfortable with both places, that just being in the everyday is not enough, and longing for something is uncomfortable because you don't live there. And I think that the bouquets were interesting in that way, in that they're some of the most ordinary thing, and so they could be just pretty, or they could symbolize the deepest of emotions. So I think it exemplifies that idea of being in between this place, wrestling with this idea between the everyday, and the sublime.
So is this made by a printmaking process or?
Yeah. So it's confusing because, as Ellen said, it's a hybrid in that I consider them drawings because I drew them. So they were hand drawn. So I draw by hand, and it's unique, but it doesn't need to be unique because it's reproducible, just like these or whatever. So I consider them drawings, but they're prints because they're editioned, and it's a printing process. But it's actually printed as a photograph. So I know. So since the advent of digital photography, negatives don't really, aren't used oftentimes. And so they have printers that take the digital file and expose it onto photo paper. So the file is exposed to traditional photo paper. So it is a photograph, and it's interesting. There's this technique called cliché vert, which harkens back to the beginning of photography, like Corot would blacken a glass plate with a candle and scratch away at it and then lay that plate right on photo paper. So it was a cameraless photograph. And I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. I mean, because
Very detailed point.
yeah, it's a contact print really, in that I'm making a drawing, and I think that was a way to reproduce the drawing. I mean, as a sort of printmaking technique, but
it would be a one-to-one.
yeah, one-to-one, yeah.
Yeah.
But so it's kind of a hybrid in that way. But since it, and the color and things like that, I think, speak to it being artificial and digital and.
The photography department at the MFA acquired one of Andy's prints. But besides loving the image, they wanted it because it was such a unique version of a photograph, right?
And how do you put down your paint?
Yeah.
And what is that?
Do you put a brush?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So I wanted to use paint, and I wanted it to be as paint-like as possible. And I was thinking about reconnecting with paintings past. And I saw a painting of Monet's A Water Lily Study, in which he painted a water lily with just a simple line. It looked like he squeezed a line out of a tube of paint. And I like that idea of what if he just painted by squeezing it out of the tube, no brush, because my work is comprised of lines, and so how is it that you make a drawing with paint instead of painting a drawing, So I thought of cake decorating, and and it made sense because that like decorating a cake is drawing in lines, or writing in lines with something thick and viscous like that. And so I started to experiment with icing. And I got pastry bags, and I got tips, and I experimented with drawing on the wall with icing and on different things with icing, because icing is much cheaper than paint. But so with much experimentation, I found the viscosity of paint using mediums and stuff. It's acrylic paint. It's just acrylic paint. So, and I started to draw over my lines with a pastry bag and a cake decorating tip. But physically, it was very arduous to do that. So I ended up, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I ended up mechanizing it a bit. So I kind of created a paint machine that has a tip. That's the paint decorating tip, and I mixed vast quantities of paint. And I was able to sort of extrude it and draw with it. And I love that it actually goes pretty quickly. And so I thought of Chuck Close. I heard him interviewed that he's constrained by so many rules, and I guess I create rules for myself as well. But that in his portraits, where each square, I heard him say, it's almost like a small impressionistic painting. That's like his joy that he experiences over and over again. And so even though he's working with all these constraints, he expresses himself in each square. And I was thinking I'm doing something similar, that, I mean, I'm painting the same flower twice, but, you know, instead of doing that, I do this. And every time it's different. It's kind of like this living thing, you know.
It reminds me a lot of artists' palette tables that
Yeah.
I often wanted to buy. Can I have this?
Yeah, no, that's great, because, right, it is the paint itself just sitting on a surface, yeah.
Why do you use the raw linen? I always.
Yeah. I think that, again, that was with the notion in mind that that I wanted the material, like linen is like the most traditional painting surface, you know, so I think there was a historical element to it that I was looking for, but also it kind of reverses the notion that the nature that you're depicting is the nature, and the canvas is like the synthetic thing. That with this, the flowers are plastic and the canvas is a natural material, you know. So it's plants, you know. So I kind of like that idea that the fabric is made from plants and the paint is made from plastic, you know.
Yeah, so what's interesting, and I don't know if you can see it, but if we were to take this panel and move it over here, you would have this painting, this diptych repeated.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. Oh, you can see that? Oh, okay.
So I would love, I mean, I had this idea that it could be an endless repeating pattern. And I was thinking of like a EKG or like Brancusi's endless column. You know, like Brancusi's endless column, are people familiar with that? You know, that it's a repeated shape and it's not an endless column. You know, it ends like 25 feet in the air. But it could, you know, and it's sort of like a mathematical thing that could go on forever. This could keep going. And
Well,
one of the things that interests me is, or a couple things. I mean, hearing you talk is, you know, really deepen the understanding of the work, and the way you use these different technologies and kind of blur the boundaries is partly just a reflection of what's happening in those technologies anyhow. And also you have there's a certain expediency where you're just using what works, but you're also specifically incorporating that into the content of the work because it's already about how nature is mediated through these other kind of forms of representation. So that adds these layers to it, which I think is really interesting. And I was also noticing how this exact palette is really in the, if you look closely, it's really the same half dozen. But the other thing in looking at this quartet of paintings and the mirroring and so it's not just mirroring, but it's actually looping. And it really reminds me of Jasper John's crosshatch paintings because the triptychs are specifically about connecting across the panels, and then the ends mirror each other.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you should look at the all of the crosshatch paintings are like that, but some are particularly specifically about the ways that they mirror and repeat and then flip. Like the last series, the Between the Clock and the Bed series, is maybe the culmination of that. But they imply a movement in space, and also some of them go through time and helixes, and so it's an interesting sort of parallel to this. Yeah. I'm just going to jump in to say we're going to kind of wrap up here. And I really want to thank you.
Thank you so much.